All right. So tonight is a special event for multiple reasons. One of the main reasons is that we get to welcome back Astro Bob King as our presenter tonight. So Bob was our first Cafe Sci presenter 5 years ago, which is awesome. And at the time, he talked about the future of humans in space, and it was such an awesome event and such a cool discussion. And we're really delighted to have him back here tonight. So for those of you that are in the Twin Ports, the Duluth area, you've probably seen Bob, his writing or his photography in the Duluth News Tribune. If you have any interest in astronomy around town, hopefully you've gotten a chance to check out one of his presentations at the planetarium. You might have seen him out on the cross-country ski trails. Yeah, so we're really excited to have Bob as a member of the community. And yeah, when I first ran into Bob, I was up at the planetarium at the university, and he was giving the monthly talk for the Arrowhead Astronomical Society, and going through the program up there, and it was really awesome. It was really fascinating, and so and since then I've appreciated his ability to sort of share science and share especially space, and tonight he's going to do some of that, and sort of a journey that he went onto very recently to Antarctica to do some observing of the sky. And also we're going to see some pictures of some of the animals. We're going to hear a little bit about, what it takes to get down to Antarctica, and all of that. So anyway, so welcome to Astro Bob, and yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Great to have everybody here. Good to see all of your names and imagine all of your faces. I'm sitting here in my bedroom in Duluth, which is where the computer is, and we're going to be looking at Antarctica tonight. We'll take a little trip. It seems like an odd thing to do on a cold winter night, to take you to a place that's generally much colder than Duluth. Although when I was there, which was in the end of November until about the middle of December, it was actually approaching summer in Antarctica, being on the opposite end of the world. So it was not too bad temperature-wise. Typically down there at that time, the average daily temperature high was about 32 degrees, and I think the coldest I felt was just somewhere in the mid-20s, mid to upper 20s in the evening. So feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I'll show you a whole bunch of animals. I'm also going to show you some delicious food. And then we'll talk a little bit about the sky too, the southern sky, and why it's a little bit different than the northern sky. Things go around the other way down there. Of course, from their perspective, they go the wrong way up here in the northern hemisphere. So with that, we will go to the presentation. And we'll start with one of my favorite penguins. It came right up to me and almost seemed welcoming. And this was one of the very first stops that we made in Antarctica. But the journey did not begin there. Of course, it began in Duluth. And so I put this little map together so you can see just how far Antarctica is from Duluth. And for that matter, from Wisconsin as well, for those listening from that part of the world. You see Duluth way up here. And I took an airplane down to Dallas. And then I took a long overnight flight all the way down to Santiago, Chile. And that was about 10 and a half hours on the airplane. Very long, but they fed us well, and they had movies, so I could, kind of pass some time looking at movies. I think I watched some old Curb Your Enthusiasm shows, as I recall. But we stopped in Santiago, stayed at a hotel there for a night, was tested for COVID. By the way, the number of tests because of the COVID pandemic was fairly amazing. By the time I actually got onto the boat, the ship itself that took us to Antarctica, I had been through 5 COVID tests, and I was certified negative all the way through. And it's like a delicate thread, though. If one of those had been positive, this entire journey would have been canceled for me. So we stopped in Santiago, stayed there, and then flew the next day down to Punta Arenas, which is near the tip of South America. So it seems like you're traveling incredibly far to Santiago, and then you still have another 3 hours or so by plane to get to the tip of South America. And then there is the journey from South America to Antarctica, which on a global scale does not look large, but that's another 750 miles or so by ship. The total distance from Duluth all the way down to the Antarctic Peninsula, which was our destination, was about 8,000 miles. This is a scene from Punta Arenas, our final land designation at the bottom of South America. I just shot this out the bus windows. We were traveling from the airport just to give a little flavor of the town. Graffiti is alive and well in Punta Arenas. And I found it interesting that I found one word I understood, which was funky. So there it is, right there for you. The most amazing thing to me about this city is when I'm taking a picture now from the ship, we boarded the ship, was the fact that it has a big green hill, which those of you in Duluth might look at this and go, wow, that sort of looks like Duluth, Minnesota. And it actually did. It reminded me of Duluth. And I had traveled so far. And here was a place that resembled my hometown, Duluth, Minnesota. So that was kind of fun. As I mentioned, there were a lot of tests and there were lots and lots of papers that had to be done online, filled out very carefully with the Chilean government in order to get permission to be down there during the pandemic. And if you made a mistake, and a couple of people in our group actually made a mistake on the online form for the Chilean government, if you made one and you couldn't go back, you were not allowed on the trip. This affidavit was required, and then numerous COVID tests. And this is my final one here, so I had to take a picture of it. I got a little sticker on my sweater, says I'm negative. This was at Punta Arenas just before we got on the ship. The final sticker, the final negative, and we were ready to go. So it was really, there was quite a bit of stress involved in preparing for the trip because you had to get all of your little things lined up exactly for you to get there and for them to take you on board. So I was super happy to have this part of the process to be done. Here's our route. There's the airplane showing you from up here by Santiago. Down here near the tip, but not at the tip, is Punta Arenas. That's where we got on the ship. And the ship is, you can see over here, it was called the MS Roald Amundsen. And it is piloted, or it's owned, I should say, by the Hurtigruten Expeditions, which is out of Norway. And it is not one of those giant casino-like cruise ships. It's a modest ship that holds about 530 people. Because of the COVID situation, it was only about half full when we got there. So we got probably more attention than normal because there weren't as many people on board. But we took off from Punta Arenas, which has a latitude of minus 53 degrees south. And that would be the equivalent in the Northern Hemisphere of plus 50 degrees north, which would put you up somewhere around Calgary, up in Alberta. So it's fairly far south, just as central or southern Canada is fairly far north. The ship went through a little passageway called the Beagle Channel, and then past Cape Horn, which is one of the last bits of land south of South America, right on the coast, and then down to latitude minus 64.5. This is where we spent our time in Antarctica. And I'll show you more close-ups coming up here in just a little bit. But we spent our time in the Antarctic Peninsula, that little part that curls up from the main continent. After we spent a number of days down there, and it was unbelievably wonderful to be down there, we headed off for the South Orkney Islands and then came back up here and spent time at the Falkland Islands and then came back through the Strait of Magellan to Punta Arenas and then back home. The reason I was on this journey to begin with is because I was invited. It is a rather expensive expedition, although I'd recommend it to anybody. It's worth saving up for. It costs about $16,000 to do this trip. For me, it was free except for incidentals and whatever I wanted to spend on extra trips, because they have kind of these excursions during the journey. But it's expensive, but oh my gosh, I swear I would do it again. So I went because I was with the Sky and Telescope group. I write for Sky and Telescope magazine, and they invited me to be the trip guide, the person to kind of oversee our little group and make sure everybody was happy. And so I did that part and got them into a special restaurant and all these other things, and answered questions and helped them make solar filters, because that was the other part of the eclipse. It was Sky and Telescope, that group. They were particularly interested because during this journey, there would be an eclipse of the sun. So we all were excited about seeing a total solar eclipse from the South Ocean, or the Southern Ocean, pardon me, north of Antarctica later on in the trip. And I'll get into that too. After all of the, I have to be honest with you, after all of the planning, that you do for a trip like this, and preparation, and then again, the paperwork and COVID, when that ship finally took off and its first bit of the journey went through something called the Beagle Passage, I leaned back against the bow of the ship and I just let it all out. I was almost in tears. I felt like somebody had let me out of prison practically. I'd just been working hard. So it was such a joy. And you can see you're down this channel, and on either side, just wilderness and beautiful mountains with glaciers. And it's called the Beagle Channel because this is where Charles Darwin went through on the Beagle, the ship the Beagle, back in the early 19th century, around 1830, 1840. This is where he made some of his crucial observations of nature that led to him developing the theory of evolution. And so you're taking in these views, you're also experiencing the sense of history. Charles Darwin had been here before and seen the very same things I could see now. I felt like this albatross. There were lots of albatrosses. Now, a lot of people, we see a lot of gulls in Duluth, and your first impression was, oh, that must be a gull. But this is what one of the species of albatrosses looks like. This is a black-browed albatross. It was the most common albatross that we saw during the journey. I felt like that bird, believe me. And here's just a general scene of people on deck. Very calm water here because you're in this channel between these islands, and people were just taking pictures. The temperature at the time was about 40 degrees, 45 degrees, but it was extremely windy. When the wind, it would just, you'd pass one of the glaciers and the wind would come down the glacier and it would be 50-mile-an-hour winds. And I had to stand with my back to the wind, and it was so great to just be buffeted and pushed around. What a great experience. And there were scenes like this where there was just these huge rocky cliffs and forests down below, and then a glacier coming right down to the tide water line here, as you see in this picture. You can see it all broken up and calving. Well, it took a number of hours, about a day, I would say, approximately, to make it through the Beagle Passage, which I've outlined here in black. Oops, sorry. And then we went through a little bit of Argentina, because you're in Chile during this part, and then you go into Argentina. And then something that I totally didn't expect, I knew we were going to go across a lot of water to get to Antarctica. The particular section of the Southern Ocean that we passed through is the famous Drake Passage, which is about 600 miles of open water and one of the windiest spots on the planet. You have the two oceans meeting, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and there is no land here. And so we entered the Drake Passage overnight. And I remember I was laying in my bed, I had fallen asleep, and then I woke up because it felt like somebody was actually at the side of my bed, lifting the bed up and trying to tip me out and roll me out of the bed. And then it dawned on me that these were waves. So we hit some very wavy, very high water. And I mean, everybody was walking around like they were drunk on the ship. It was crazy trying to walk around on the ship. And one of the hardest things I discovered was one of the simplest things that you could try to do, which is putting on your pants in the morning while the ship is listing this way and that way. But thankfully, I did not get seasick. But if anybody did on board, they always had a doctor. So you could get Dramamine or whatever you needed. This journey of 600 miles to the South Shetland Islands, which is where Antarctica began for us right there. That took about 3 full days. And this was the view. I had never been in a place in my life where I could look out for 3 full days at the horizon and see absolutely nothing but water and waves. There were albatrosses and other wildlife too that we saw. And that was part of the great joy of the journey. But it was just water and water and more water. The sense of being on you always hear that the earth is what, 70 some percent water. Well, I felt it. We all felt it. This was an actual experience of just being out on the ocean for what seemed like forever. Here's another view looking from up on the upper decks downward into the open ocean called the Southern Ocean. Finally, we landed. Our first place was called Half Moon Island, and it was snowing. Temperature was probably about 30 degrees, 31 degrees at the time. And they take you out on Zodiac boats, these rafts in groups. So they give you each group had its own name. Our group was called the Cape Petrels. And there were a Gentoo penguin group and very, named for the local wildlife. And when you heard your group mentioned, you got your boots on and you went down to the Zodiac raft, and then they took you to one of the destinations. This was called Half Moon Island, where there was a really wonderful penguin colony. You had to wear very special, they gave you these rubber boots to wear. You couldn't bring your own footwear because they wanted to always clean them. And I'll show you that afterwards. They were really into not spreading anything bad to any of these pristine places. So everything was disinfected afterwards. So you had to wear the same boots on every excursion. Couldn't believe it. Walked up this hill. They would mark the path. You couldn't just wander by yourself because you might fall off the end of a glacier or something. But they did mark a path, and then you could kind of wander off the path a little. And I walked up this hill, and there were just all of these wonderful penguins. These are called chinstrap penguins, and you can see that's a great name for them because they look like they're wearing masks with a chin strap on. One of the things I didn't realize about penguins, well, first of all, a couple of things. They do walk like they do in cartoons with the little flippers like that. So your first impression is to kind of laugh. You just kind of can't believe it that they look so darn cute. But the other thing that penguins do that I wasn't aware of is that they don't just navigate by their feet. They drop down on their bellies and they use their flippers and their legs to slide around, especially if there's a little bit of a slope. They'll slide downhill and they look like turtles when they're doing this. And so this is one of the chinstrap penguins sliding around in my direction. Here's kind of a scene from Half Moon Island. You can see some housing here on the right. This is an Argentine research station, but it had not opened up yet for the summer. It wouldn't open up until January. So it was still closed when we were there. Here's a bit of a beach. The feeling being here, just this little island, this first taste of Antarctica was like, I felt far away. It felt so wild and quiet and just untouched, even though there were, 150 people going there by rafts. So it was quite lovely. This hill that you see here was used for snowshoeing. You had a choice of activities. You could go on the hikes, or you could get a pair of snowshoes that they had on the ship and you could climb that hill that I just showed you, or you could also kayak. Some people chose that. So hiking, snowshoeing, kayaking, these were the activities. This is one of the glaciers that was just behind me, from behind the penguin that I showed you. You could see that beautiful blue color to the ice, the cracking there. It was just, everything is just on this massive scale in Antarctica. Here's the group of chinstrap penguins. Every once in a while, they would get territorial about things, and one would raise his or her head up and just start shrieking. And then the whole group would shriek in unison. And it was a wonderful thing to watch. And then they would all settle down. Penguins were a big highlight of the trip. Wildlife was a huge highlight. People say, well, gee, you went for the eclipse, right? Well, the eclipse was something that we all anticipated, really wanted to see. But Antarctica was so overwhelming in what it offered that even though the eclipse, and I'll let you know right in advance, the eclipse turned out to be cloudy. I have no bad feelings about this trip whatsoever. It feels like I was full with just what we saw and did. You could always tell a penguin colony as we would channel now between these islands in the Antarctic Peninsula. because you would see these brown, pardon me about this, these brown streaks in the snow. There's the penguins and there's the penguin poop. And you would always know, oh, from a distance, you'd say, oh, that's a penguin colony. So this is one penguin colony that I photographed before we went up for a visit. And it was way up on this hill. So it was a bit of a climb. And they would supply poles too, so that you could, make it easier up the hill. Here's the view once we landed. Here's some of those little rafts that I mentioned to you. And everybody's got their wonderful orange windbreaker on. The ship gives you a windbreaker as part of the package, and that's for you to keep. And I guess easier to find you if you get lost, right? Because it's orange. So we're all going up this very high slope. You could see some fantastic icebergs there. They were everywhere in the waters between these islands. And when you got to the top, here was this wonderful colony. This is a different species of penguins called Gen 2 penguins. And they were all just talking amongst themselves. And this was the time when they were mating and also laying eggs. So there was a lot of interesting mating type behaviors happening while we were there. And some of it was very loving, the way that they would stroke their beaks together, male and female. And you would watch it and you felt like, this is love. I'm not kidding. It really, it was an emotional response, not just for me, but for others as well. So this is a colony or rookery, however you call it, of Gen 2 penguins. You can see the icebergs again in the backdrop. We were told not to get any closer than 15 feet to the penguins, but sometimes the penguins would just come up to you. They have no fear of humans because they evolved in Antarctica without any land predators. Their predators are either in the water, right, like orcas, like whales, or they're in the air. Birds will come down and want to steal a penguin egg. So when they see us, we're like, well, we're perfectly fine. They're just curious about us. But we try to keep our distance of 15 feet. And the reason is it's because of COVID. We did not want to somehow spread that to them and then cause a horrible incident in Antarctica. So there were a lot of precautions like that. I set my camera bag down on the ground once, and one of the crew said, you should probably pick that up. I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So there was some caution, some respect for the environment, which I appreciated. Here's another view, a different penguin colony that we visited. This was quite a long, and you could go out there on a boat and you could spend your whole time. Usually it was many hours, 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, and you could stay out the entire time if you wanted, or just go for an hour and come back. There were always rafts coming and going. When you came back, you can see here the picture of the rubber boots. You had to go through this interesting cleaning station. So you got your boots scrubbed, and then after the scrubbing, you had to walk on these soft, cushy antiseptic pads, and then you went back up to your room and you use those boots each time and clean them each time. Lots of great experiences there, but the one that really sunk into my heart, what I just love, when I think of it now, it stains me in difficult times, was they offered a lottery to go camping for one night in Antarctica on one of the islands, Danko Island it was called. And I put my name in the lottery. There were 30 slots and I was picked. And I hesitated because these extracurricular activities you have to pay for. And this costs quite a bit of money. And I had some discussions about it with some of the people in our group. And I got some looks like, come on, just do it. We need to think about the money later. So I just did it. And of course, I completely forgot about that, 2 days later. So we went camping, 30 of us, and these are the sleds. You can see the pads, the sleeping bags, and so forth. So we dragged our little sleds over to where the camping spot was, and we set up tents. I've never gone winter camping before, so this was my very first time. And I was telling people that this is my first time winter camping until I realized that I'm not winter camping. I'm actually summer camping because it's Antarctica in the month of December. So we set them up right on the snow, which made for nice, comfortable sleeping as it turned out. The ship just to enhance the sense of being on a camping trip and being away from civilization, the ship took off. That's the rolled Amundsen there. It just went around the bend and found another place to anchor for the night. And we said goodbye. So this is a photograph of that. When we went down to Antarctic, I was thinking, oh, we should see some southern stars. Turns out that at latitude minus 64 and a half, and at the end of November, early December, it's basically twilight all night long. And so what you see here are some of the folks from camping, and there I am with my phone and a phone app trying to see any stars at all. Here you can see sort of a view of the app. By the way, I'm going to share this app with you at the end so that you can use this app too to find constellations, no matter where on Earth you happen to be. So we were using the app, looking up, finally, in twilight, found two stars, the brightest star, Sirius, and the second brightest star, Canopus. But you really had to know where to look. Otherwise, it was just twilight all night long. One of the things we did was at around 10:30 in the evening, we all got together and took a hike up this, I guess it's a glacier covered in snow, but we took a hike way up to the top of this hill, and we just stopped and we spent as long as we wanted, just taking in the quietude of the place and the sense of perpetual twilight. It really felt for me like time stood still. This is a picture that really captures how it looked when you were there. There was semi-darkness the entire time. This is the Earth's shadow right here along the bottom, that gray band that you see. And you can see the Earth's shadow anytime it's clear right after sunset. It comes up from the eastern horizon when the sun sets in the west, and it soon blends into the night sky. But here, the Earth's shadow was out all night, from sunset until the sun rose again at around 2:30 in the morning. So the light was just so succulent, I guess, that twilight. It's so calming. And because it didn't change, it felt like a timeless place. Here's our camp. You can see our little orangey tents there. I'm in the very far end of the tent there in the suburban area, away from the downtown of the tents. This is a little inlet and beautiful, beautiful mountains and glaciers. During the night, that was one of the surprises, was listening to the sound of calving glaciers in the distance. It sounded like thunderstorms, distant thunderstorms, that rumbling sound. So I did finally get to sleep. Again, in mid-twilight at about 2:00 in the morning, I gave in and gave up, and I laid down and I fell asleep. We were told not to take anything from Antarctica, that people had taken stones and this and that, and if everybody did this, it would alter the environment. And so I obeyed. I did not take anything, but I had to get a little bit of Antarctica into me. And so I reached down and I cracked off a piece of snow. And you can see it's that icy, crystally kind of the snow from a snow cone. And I devoured it. And I took that from Antarctica. And it's in there somewhere still, I hope. This is the morning when we woke up. The ship came back, of course. They brought the raft in and we had to go back. It was tough to leave. It was truly a magical evening. It had gotten cloudy a little bit in the morning, but dramatically so. I was extremely happy because I camped there and even slept a couple of hours. Here we are getting back into the raft, ready to head back to the ship. And turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but everybody who went on this little adventure camping got a special certificate. And it was called the Amundsen Night Certificate. And they tell you where we were, what the latitude and longitude was, and where and when. So that was a nice surprise. On board the ship, there were lots of things to do too. I mean, the excursions were kind of the meat of it for me and for probably a lot of the different guests there, where you would go out and spend half a day, whole day exploring. But the ship itself had a lot to offer, including unbelievable views from the various restaurants. There were 3 restaurants, 2 of them were included in your trip, and then a third one was a high-end restaurant you had to pay for. But there was no need to go to the high-end restaurant because the regular one offered unbelievable food. And again, spectacular views too, including, not that I saw this through the window, but we would see this on occasion. There would be icebergs that would drift by. There's big icebergs, right? There's little icebergs too. And sometimes you'd see penguins on one. Well, this is a crab eater seal that was taking a nice nap on an iceberg as it drifted by. Just the views too, these spectacular mountains wrapped in clouds, cleaving glaciers. It felt at one moment, and this is maybe cliche, it's been said before, but at one moment I looked out and there were no people, no roads. It was just wildlife, water, snow, sky. And I thought, this must be what it's like on another planet, where there's no human presence. It must look like this or feel like this on another planet. So it was a good sensation. The colors of some of the ice, this is not fake. I didn't touch this up in Photoshop. Things drifted by, or we drifted by them, that were just utterly blue. They were so rich. It looked like somebody had poured dye into the ice. Just gorgeous. People would look out the window like, look at that, and run out to the rail outside the ship, get a picture, and then come back to lunch. Bigger icebergs, amazing clouds. And now we get to the menu. I did mention that the food was really good on the ship. Here's a menu. This was at the fancy restaurant. Part of my responsibility was to take each one of the people in our group to this restaurant so that they could experience high cuisine, I guess you could call it. And this was one evening we had starters were smoked shrimp, reindeer and lingonberries, and bouillon. For some strange reason I never anticipated, I ate a lot of reindeer on this ship. This was at the normal restaurant that was paid for. This is halibut. Everything was done up just beautifully. It looked so delicious and it tasted so delicious. So I have several food shots. Pardon me. I know this is not icebergs or animals, but this was a joyful part of the trip too. Just the pleasure of eating delicious food. This is creme brulee. Unbelievable. Best creme brulee I've ever had. And this is some kind of lamb or veal. Oh, that was good too. So when you were aboard the ship, you could ask for as many desserts if you want. Let's say you like creme brulee a lot. Well, you could just keep ordering more of that, whatever you liked. I felt like the president of the United States, like I had a staff waiting on me for anything, as we all did. They also had, this was what makes this voyage a bit unique. They had a science center aboard the Roald Amundsen, and they had qualified people doing science, history, people to talk about krill, plankton, wildlife, penguins, geology, you name it. And I jumped in, I asked if I could do a presentation on astronomy, and they actually let me do it. So I had my own presentation there about comets and meteorites. But this is Martina on the right, and she's doing a talk about plankton. And people could come up and look at plankton that they fetch from overboard. They lower a bucket, and then you could look at it here through their really excellent microscopes. There are all kinds of things. There were photo seminars, how to improve your picture composition, everything you can imagine. So it was a joy to have a group of science-trained people on board you could ask questions of and then just listen to their talks. This is the fellow who I helped out. His name is Kelly Beatty. He is a senior editor for Sky and Telescope. He was the ship's astronomer. He was the person responsible for doing his best, working with the captain of the ship to get us into the path of totality, into where it would be clear during this total eclipse that happened on December the 4th in this part of the world. It occurred around the Falkland Islands, crossed over into part of Antarctica. After all of this fun on board, naturally, people would nap. And this is my roommate. He went by himself. I came by myself, so we shared a room together. And he was a physics teacher, so he always wore his hat. Physics is fun. But a lot of people sometimes during the talks, because we were so active, people would be falling asleep because they just couldn't help it. After we left those islands, we were attempting to get to another island to do an excursion, but sea ice got in the way. You'll see maps of Antarctica that make it look like you can get right to the continent, the coast, but there's ice all around there. And the captain tried, but could not get the ship through the ice. So here you can see it's cracking. He was testing it. And I don't know if it was the ship or the wind that cracked this ice. But once the ice is open, at the edge of the ice, you'll often see orca whales. They are looking for seals or penguins climbing up or getting off of the ice. So they kind of patrol the edge of the sea ice looking for prey. The captain decided, what the heck? If we can't get to our destination, let's just anchor off the sea ice and zodiac our way to the sea ice. And so we spent an afternoon just walking on that ice. And it was windy out there, really super windy, but the temperature wasn't bad. It was in the low 30s. So nothing that, our region, folks from here couldn't handle. And they took off the edge in another way. They set up a stand where you could get hot chocolate there. So that was lovely. As we continued now north of Antarctica towards the eclipse path, we passed by lots of really huge icebergs. And this one is basically a piece of it's called a tabular iceberg because it's broken off of an ice shelf. And you can look at that thing, and I was trying to think of a comparison, and it seemed to me like it was as big as like the Mall of America or something, but I think it was actually much bigger than that. And let's say that this is about 100 feet tall. In classic tip of the iceberg style, there's actually 1,000 feet of ice here, approximately. We only see about 10% of that ice above the water. So just imagine ice continuing down for probably another 900 feet. That's how massive this is. There were whales. I'm not sure which species, they may be orcas, but there were whales that you would see. Somebody would call, you wherever on the ship and say, hey, there's orcas, there's whales off this, the port side or on the bow. And you'd run out to get a look and maybe try to get a picture of them. They'd call them blows because they'd be blasting out water from their blowholes. Now onto the eclipse. Here's the path of the eclipse. Here's once again, there's South America. Right down there is the tip. Here's Antarctica. Here's the peninsula. Right up here is where we spent our time in Antarctica. And here's the eclipse path. Our spot was in this area. We were mobile. Even though the forecast was very bad for this part of the world in November and December, it's almost always cloudy. There was like a 10% chance of it being clear. But sometimes there are little spots where it does clear up, like on the lee side of certain islands. And so we were headed in that direction towards what we believed was a clear sky. It was a total eclipse of the sun, which means that the moon passed directly between the sun on your left and the earth and cast a shadow right down here on the surface of the planet. We wanted to be in the center of that shadow called the umbra. And from within the center, the moon completely blocks the sun and you see a total eclipse. So Kelly worked with the ship's captain to try to find the very best place. So they had all these great weather maps, cloud forecasts, everything that you could get. By the way, you could get the internet on the ship, but it was kind of a weak internet just because there's only one satellite that serves that part of the world for shipping, for internet use. And if there's more than one ship in the area, they're all using the same satellites, so there's less bandwidth. So we couldn't do any streaming of anything on the ships at all. There's no YouTube or anything like that or Zoom meetings. Anyway, Kelly's working with the captain, trying to find the right spot. We were all just charged up, thinking that surely it will be clear. We're going to find a spot. But this is the morning of the eclipse. The time right here is about 2:40 in the morning. The sun obviously rising early. We're on the very wet deck of deck 10. Things don't look good. We're still trying to be optimistic. Turned out that there was a low cloud layer the entire time called a marine layer, and it indeed did block our view of the sun, but we still got to experience the eclipse. And here's a photo I took during totality, which lasted a little over a minute, maybe a minute and 20 seconds, something like that. And the shadow just swept down with such speed. It was incredible. You know, you just, even though you didn't see the eclipse sun, you felt the eclipse happening. You experienced the eclipse. And when the shadow left and the sun returned, again, you couldn't see the sun, but it left so quickly because of the angle at which the moon shadow hit the water in that part of the world. The moon shadow was moving at over 6,000 miles an hour. So when the eclipse was over, I felt like I was opening my eyes. It was almost as quick of change from night to daylight as just opening your eyes. I've never experienced that before. Some people did get clear skies. This was taken on the Antarctic continent on Union Glacier. This was a place where it was the best place where you could see the total eclipse of the sun, but to see it, the people who were down there had to pay an enormous sum of money for this privilege. It cost $50,000 to fly in, land, and see this eclipse on Union Glacier. But look, it was clear. There's totality right there. This was a shock. We're now North Antarctica. We're headed back home, but we're going to stop off in the Falkland Islands. And this was the first car and road I saw in about 2 weeks. And I was shocked. I thought it just looked completely out of place. I've never had that experience before. We landed, took the raft over. Here we are, getting some instructions there. And then when we arrived, was that a Land Rover, I think? That's Biffo is her name. She and her family own that island. It's called Saunders Island in the Falklands. And it's home to albatross colonies and lots of different kinds of penguins. And there's also a giant whale skeleton not far up from the beach. So we wandered, on the Falklands, we could wander around a lot more. So that was very enjoyable. The penguins, different species. This is a Gen 2 penguin. And you can see a little penguin chick there poking its head out. And here's some cooperation between the male penguin and the female. The male is collecting rocks, and one by one, just very carefully, very slowly, the male would take one rock at a time and set it down in the nest for the other penguin. And that was its job while the female penguin sat on the egg. Another Gen 2 penguin with 2 chicks. So it's just great to see. It was a nice season, nice time of year to be there to see eggs and the birth of chicks, penguin chicks. Here's a view of the Falklands looking out. We hiked up this one hill to see an albatross colony. On the way, there were some amazing cormorants. These are called king cormorants, and they were picking up globs of mud and grass in order to build their nests. So I got a picture of one with a mouthful. These are different species of penguin. They're called rock hoppers, and they were just amazing. Instead of walking, they did hop from one place to the next, and they had these beautiful eyebrow-like features. And here we have a male and female, just sort of engaging in some dating, I guess you could call it, kissing. These are Magellanic penguins, and the family on that island also kept sheep. And so the Magellanic penguins had no problem living right alongside the sheep. This was the albatross colony that we went to visit on the other side of that hill that I showed you earlier. There were just hundreds of them together and no fear of humans whatsoever. Here's also some intimate behavior, foreplay, I guess you could call it, between 2 different dark-browed albatrosses. The wind picked up while we were there. So we were just called, the word went out, we're going back right now. And so we got on the rafts and left. There were some penguins hurrying along the shore there. We got in these rafts and got totally soaked. I mean, the waves just smashed into you. So that was another great experience. Thankfully, I kept my camera gear dry. Another stop we made was on this island in the Falklands called West Point. And there's the British flag. The islands officially belong to the United Kingdom, and so they are British, but there's still some contention from the Argentines that they really truly belong to them or should belong to them. So they fought a war over this back in the 1980s. Britain won the war, and they remain the property, I guess, of the UK. There was a cottage on this one island, and on top, perched, was a turkey vulture, a familiar species here in our region too, the very same, and it's the most common bird of prey in the Falkland Islands. The air there smelled wonderfully from this flower. It smelled like sweet coconuts, and it's called gorse, and there were just huge places. This is an invasive, by the way. It was introduced, but I have to say it was wonderful to see flowers in bloom in December, and they smelled so good. This was the albatross rookery, another one in a spectacular setting, and I'm right on top of them with a wide angle lens, so we're just like 3 feet apart. Again, they do not mind us at all. They have no fear of us. It's almost like being on the Galapagos Islands. So those are some of the pictures of the wildlife and some of the experiences that I had there. We didn't see the eclipse, and I didn't see any stars really, except for those 2 in Antarctica. But once we got to the Falklands, it got dark enough to be able to see a few things in the night sky. It was never completely dark. It was always a little twilight because you're down at minus 57, minus 55 degrees, which is like central northern Canada, and it's near summer. So you always get some twilight, but it was still really great. When you travel in an airplane, north or south, especially if you've lived like we have in the Northern Hemisphere, when you go south, you literally expand your horizons. You get to see what's below the horizon. We see stars to our horizon, but below that horizon, there are more and more and more stars. You just have to fly south to see them. Let me give you an example. In the Northern Hemisphere, the sun rises in the left part of the sky when you face south, and it moves to the right, right? It rises in the east on the left, highest at noon or thereabouts, and then it sets in the west. Well, when you travel in a plane, ship, however, and you go south, we're going to start in Chicago, for example. The sun is here this time of year in Chicago. So it's kind of low in the southern sky because it's winter here, the sun at its lowest. But when you are at the equator, the sun has moved higher in the sky because you are now going around below the horizon so that you're bringing the sun up. By the time you get to the Falklands, well below the equator, the sun has moved past the overhead point and is now in the northern sky. So to see the sun, you can't face south anymore. You've got to turn around and face to the north. And when you face north to look at the sun, while it still rises in the east and sets in the west, it rises on the right side of the sky, not the left, as it does in our hemisphere, passes due south, and then it sets in the west on the left end of the sky. So it moves in exactly the opposite direction that it does from the northern hemisphere. Let me show you another example. Here's Orion. I bet you've seen the constellation Orion a few times this winter. There's his 3 belt stars, and then above the belt we have Betelgeuse, and below the belt is Rigel. Shoot a line through the belt, you'll see this bright star called Sirius. This is Orion. It's continuing here, but it'll repeat. This is Orion in Chicago, and there's Sirius. As you fly south, this is where Orion is. It keeps going up and up and up. And as you fly south, you keep bringing up new stars from the southern horizon. So below Orion is Sirius. And then if you keep going, you'll see Canopus in Miami. You get to Bogota and you'll see Canopus and Achernar. And if you go all the way to Antarctica, Orion is just like the sun. It went overhead into the northern sky. So in order to see Orion, you got to turn yourself around, face north, and there it is, upside down. And I've got proof that it really does look upside down from the southern hemisphere. Here's Sirius. Here's the boxy outline of Orion. And here's the three belt stars right there. So Sirius, instead of being down here, is up here, and Orion is upside down. And here's the Pleiades, the seven sisters from the Falkland Islands. You know, that little dipper-shaped group of stars, it's also upside down, right down there, very low in the sky. So on the Earth, in the northern hemisphere, when you look out, you see the northern stars. In the southern hemisphere, you're on the other end of the planet. I don't know how you stay there without falling off, but you're on the other end of the planet and you're looking up into the sky and you see stars that only you can see, that are blocked for the northern hemisphere by the bulk of the planet itself. We, both hemispheres, northern and southern, we share the stars that are visible right over the equator. So there's like 36 northern constellations, and there are about 32 southern constellations, and then the shared groups, there's about 20 of those. So we have our own here in the north because of looking up north, and then we have their own in the south, and then a shared group of stars. Here's the beautiful southern Milky Way. This time of year, there's Sirius, upside down, all wrong. And then below Sirius and the big dog, the Milky Way continues. We can see in our region right down here, right where I'm drawing a diagonal line. All of this is below our horizon and invisible unless we travel to the southern hemisphere. And then you get to see the stellar southern Milky Way. It's just packed with bright things, wonderful to look at in binoculars. Of course, it has the Southern Cross, Alpha and Beta Centauri, and a bunch of other cool stuff too. Here's a picture I took on board the ship of someone looking out at the southern Milky Way. And it was really, really hard to take pictures on the ship because it was always moving, right? It's moving in the waves. There's always wind out there. It's a factor. And so I had to take my camera and use it at the very highest ISO that was possible, which for me was around 25,000 ISO and an exposure of 1 or 2 seconds maximum to get these photographs. So they're a little grainy, but they do give you a sense of what it looks like. This is from the Falklands. Can you spot the Southern Cross here? Somebody may see it. There's also Alpha Centauri in this picture. I'll draw on the lines. This is the first thing we saw every night was the Southern Cross, and next to it, the two bright stars, Alpha and Beta Centauri, and the constellation of Centaurus, the Centaur. Here, I drew in the lines for you there. Now you can see Southern Cross and Alpha Centauri. Beautiful part of the sky. And this is one of my favorite photos on the ship. Here's the southern Milky Way again from the Falklands. And two objects that you can never see from Duluth, from the Northern Hemisphere. These are called the Magellanic Clouds, named after Ferdinand Magellan, who spent a lot of time in this region, and his crew circumnavigated the globe. But these two clouds, these little puffs, are actually separate galaxies, small galaxies that orbit around the Milky Way galaxy. So they're companions to our galaxy. And you could just lay back on the ship's deck, look up, and you could see these two galaxies with the bright southern Milky Way. It's a great joy for me to see this. And just a couple of things before we wrap up here about Antarctica itself. You can see the map on the right. Here's the Antarctic Peninsula. That's where I hung out. 5th largest continent. I found it hard to believe that it was first sighted in 1820. So that was like 200 years ago. No one had even seen Antarctica. But interestingly, the ancient Greeks thought that there must be a continent at the bottom of the globe. They called the northern part of the world the Arctic. That's a Greek word. So they called this part of the world where they were sure, just for balance sake, they figure, well, there's all this land in the north. There's got to be something down there to balance. So they called it Antarctica. So Antarctica, the word's been around forever, but no one saw the place until 1820, at least to our knowledge. The first landing was made in 1821, and not a whole lot of people have been there, if you think about it. We've only known about, it seems like we should know everything about the planet for centuries, but no, this is a still relatively new discovery, so to speak. It's the windiest continent. We live here on the largest freshwater lake, but in Antarctica, it holds 70% of the world's fresh water. Lowest temperature recorded on the planet was at Vostok Station, the Russian base, 128.6 degrees below zero. But the average temperature there is like 76 below zero during the wintertime. Not so bad. It's governed by the Antarctic Treaty, a group of nations that gets together periodically to decide policy. But its purpose is for peaceful and scientific research. Mining is forbidden, at least it is for the next several decades. They could change that when they meet again, but for the next several decades, no mining. And I'm happy to report that no one owns Antarctica. So that's refreshing. So I was going to tell you about that app so that maybe you would like to go out and see what stars you can see in your own hemisphere, and then bring this thing with you if you do any traveling, no matter where it is, north, south, east, west. You can take this app and use it anywhere on the planet. It's called Star Chart, and there's 10 different apps, so I'm only showing you one of them. This is one I use. It worked pretty well for me in Antarctica. I found stars at twilight down there, so that's a recommendation. Just Google iPhone Star Chart app or Android Star Chart app. And the price is nothing. It's a free app. So with that, I'll stop my share and come back on. And if there are any questions, I did see some things in the chat about the skeleton. Here we are. Yeah, I know. It was just like there, right above the beach. I don't know, Nate, if anybody has any other questions or comments they want to make, feel free to do so.
Yeah, feel free. So yeah, we'll open it up to questions, comments, any impressions, anything you want to chat with Bob about now. Feel free to either type it in the chat or unmute yourself and share. If you feel like turning on your video, go ahead. Whatever you feel comfortable with is great with us. So
yeah, that sounds good to me. You'd think in Duluth that you'd like have enough of snow and cold, but and it is vast enough up here. We get a real sense of wildness, when we go out up into the hills, off the Superior Hiking Trail or whatever. But the scale is what differentiates Antarctica a little bit from our region. But the connection is still nice, the snow and ice connection. I enjoyed coming back to Duluth. To see the first snow again on the way back. I saw it over Michigan, having gone all the way down to ice and snow, come back up through the equator. It's 80 some degrees in Santiago, and you get back to Michigan and Duluth and it's snowy.
amazing.
Thank you, Judy. I didn't know you were here. That's nice. Thanks very much. Yeah, I probably had too many photos and the presentation was a little bit longer, but I apologize for that. But
no, that's great. I will say for the folks that are out there that you might have been able to tell from the photography, but so as we know, Bob is a writer. He's an author. He runs a blog, and but I just learned that primarily for a long time his work was photography. So you could probably tell from some of those pictures if you were asking yourself, how come I can't take pictures of the night sky like that? He's had a lot of experience dealing with that. So, and actually it turns out here that that Clara and that crew is asking what kind of camera and lenses that you use.
Yeah,
so
I see it there at the chat box. Thank you, Clara, for asking. I have to tell you, it was really a pain to carry the camera. I had a little bag, and so I kept the telephoto lens in there, and then I had a wide angle zoom lens. So I just had 2.5 lenses. I had the wide angle zoom lens. I use a Canon Mark IV 5D is what it is. So it's a DSLR camera, and I've got a 16 to 35 millimeter zoom lens for the wide angle things. And then the other lens I have was a 70 to 200 millimeter telephoto. And that was good for moderate distance, but I bought a 2x converter on that rather than have another big lens so that I could turn the telephoto into a 400. And the 400 really gave me the reach that I wanted to get some of the tighter wildlife pictures. So just 2 lenses and a teleconverter basically in a bag, and use it all the time. Plus, of course, a few of those pictures are taken on my cell phone as well. So that always comes in handy. Just say no to ice and snow. You know, that's true. You do not have to go out and freeze to see the southern sky. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You could go to Tahiti. That would be a different option to take. So yes, and even get a taste of, say, the Southern Cross and things by going down to the Caribbean. Some of those constellations are visible down there. The further south you go, the more of the southern sky and the better presentation you get of those southern constellations. So at 50 degrees south, everything is right up there, you know, that you can look at. So, well, good luck on the southern trip. I hope you do take it to enjoy that southern sky. Was there any talk of glaciers melting? If you went back 10 years, do you think it would look the same? No, that is a problem with Antarctica. And certainly a worthy topic of presentation and discussion is that it is melting down there and the ice shelves are breaking off. Someone identified some of those big tabular glacier or icebergs we saw is coming from a particular ice shelf that broke off like a half a dozen years prior and were still floating about. So some of those things were actually as a result of the warming of the globe. And the melting of the ice in Antarctica and the breaking off and floating away of the ice shelf. So yeah, I would think in 10 years, indeed, it might look different. And there was talk about glacial melting as well, because we did have a geologist on board. And I think that was part of his discussion or presentation.
You mentioned, I think you called them like the Magellanic clouds, or if I'm pronouncing that right. Was that your first time being able to see those down there, or have you had an opportunity to see those galaxies? You said they're galaxies, correct?
Yeah, they're galaxies. Yeah, they're called Magellanic. I know it's kind of a weird, what you put the accent on the syllable, so where you put it. So understandable. Magellanic clouds, yes, they are. They're separate galaxies. The Milky Way itself, even though it's one big old galaxy now, it actually formed from absorbing many smaller galaxies. So the Magellanic clouds are separate from us. I know the gravitational attraction of our own galaxy is stripping away, kind of chewing away at one of the Magellanic clouds, pulling out a stream of stars and gas from it. But yeah, they do orbit around the Milky Way, similar to the way a planet orbits around the sun. And it was not my very first time. I saw the large Magellanic Cloud on a trip to Peru back in 1986, but that was the first time I saw them together. And they were right up at the top of the sky, as high as you could see. So it was really a pleasure.
That's very neat.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish we could see them from Duluth, but then, you know, you wouldn't have a reason to go on vacation down south. So I'm curious if anybody has ever considered a trip to Antarctica who is here, if it's something on their bucket list, perhaps. Maybe not.
As people are taking a second to respond, I'll say that I'd never considered it at all, but obviously seeing a presentation like this, it's like, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the cost, which is, you know, prohibitive for probably, you know, a decent amount of
I know,
but it still is, you know, it seems amazing. So
yeah, it's one of those, what I would love to do it again, but I'm sure then I would have to pay that cost. And so it might be one of those lottery winning type things where, okay, right, I've got enough now to do it. So I was extremely grateful to have the opportunity, you know, to pay for it. I worked, and my roommate was always asking me, he says, boy, what's wrong with you? You should be out doing this. I go like, I'm working, you know. I had to explain that I had a lot of things to do while I was on board the ship. But managed to squeeze in quite a bit of fun too.
Good. So we have a couple comments.
Oh,
Um,
I see Michelle. You get seasick. There were some people in our group that did get pretty badly seasick, and they did have all manner of things on board, like patches and Dramamine. And they told me, those folks told me that those things did help them too. So uh, there are ways around this. You can also get a cabin closer to the center of the ship and not the ends. I was told that's a good idea to kind of alleviate some of that rolling motion of the boat.
huh.
But thank you, Michelle. Let's see. Because of those two, does that mean there are more stars visible in the southern hemisphere? Uh, I don't know if there are more stars visible. That's a good question, but not because of those galaxies. You can't see the galaxies, even though you can see the whole galaxy with your eye, you can't see any stars in those galaxies with your naked eye. You have to use not even a pair of binoculars. You have to use a telescope to be able to see them because the individual stars that make up the galaxies are faint. But altogether, they produce a nice glow that you can see with the naked eye.
Huh. Interesting question, Sean.
Yeah. But I was very curious about the Southern Milky Way. We see it cut off right, below Sirius, and that's the end.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see how it goes on and how the texture of the Milky Way changes as it moves further south. It starts out smoky and smooth, the way it looks from our region. And then as it continues, all of a sudden, it just turns into all of these bright stars, like somebody spilled a jewel box out onto the sky. And it's a very obvious transition. And I'm still trying to learn exactly why that happens, but I've never noticed that before. So it was a really educational moment for me.
That's really neat. That's really neat.
Yeah, there's just, and now, the thing is, I was sort of a stay at home. I've become more of a stay at home person or do things just within the region, like the hiking trail and skiing. But now I'm just up for more adventures. After that, I'm like, yeah, for sure, I'll go on that.
Awesome.
I'm open to a lot of things. Just so going on the trip kind of oiled the gears, got me thinking that perhaps it's time for more travel.
That's amazing. Well, so I'll ask sort of a final question here, and it's more about sort of your connection to your work. And I'm always curious to hear how folks sort of landed where they landed and the things that they're passionate about and the things that they do. And so with you, I know you sort of cultivate multiple passions, whether it's writing or photography or astronomy. And so like I'm curious to hear in particular, we're talking about the sky tonight a little bit in travel. So maybe that one in particular, is there a moment that sort of brought you to astronomy or an individual or anything like that where you can really trace back and say, this is how I got really interested in this, and this is why I'm spending my time, in this area?
Oh, I think it's like a lot of things. They begin in childhood for
Yeah.
people, and certainly astronomy began in childhood for me when I was about 10 or 11. I I can't tell you exactly what inspired me, but there were a number of things happening at the time when I was that age.
Yeah.
Uh, there was the whole space program was getting underway with Mercury, Gemini, and eventually Apollo. And I definitely wanted to be an astronaut. I used to climb up into the tree in the backyard and read my NASA publications and just kind of wish that I could be an astronaut. But then I got glasses at a young age and I thought that was it for me, no more. But I just took an interest in the sky. I got curious about the stars, and I can't tell you the exact how the fuse was lit precisely, but I just had to know everything about the stars. I found them beautiful. I was amazed that to see the planets and watch them move in the sky. I have a little notebook from way back then where I would draw their positions in relation to the moon and the stars. So who knows how these things start? Children, they can just get caught on something and then it becomes their life. And it became my passion and became a very important part of my life. And it still sustains me. I guess the wonder of it, the vastness, and the adventure that's associated with astronomy. Granted, there's disappointments like the eclipse. You can spend a lot of time and money and it's cloudy, but you have gone on an adventure nonetheless. Or if you plan to see a meteor shower and it's clear for 20 minutes, well, you've committed, you've made the step And I love that. You've joined in the adventure and the exploration. So I think astronomy has many dimensions. It's aesthetic. It's an artistic thing in a way. It's an appreciation, like appreciating fine art when you look at the sky. It's adventure, exploration, excitement, and inspiration too, as well as providing a sense of perspective and relief to oneself. You know, if you had a difficult time, tough day at work, that you can sort of open up to the sky and let go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a little longer answer than you expected.
No,
but it does go back to childhood for sure, and I'm still sort of amazed that I've kept that same interest too, and kind of unfolded it a bit more as I've gotten older, discovered different dimensions.
Absolutely. Well,
And I think.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm grateful, and I know the folks here tonight are grateful for your continued interest and the time and effort you spend in sharing that with everybody. So, anybody who's in Duluth, if you have any interest in this, in astronomy at all, you will cross paths with Astro Bob here. So,
well, I hope so. It's really nice that people took the time to stay or to sit here and enjoy and we share together. So I appreciate having this opportunity very, very much, Nate. Absolutely. And I see there's one more thing that came across. Kelsey, thanks so much. I appreciate that as well. Judy, I am doing community ed classes. I've got one coming up at the beginning of February, as a matter of fact, 4 evenings in February, starting on the 1st. And then university. Pardon me?
What is the class?
Well, the class is called Astronomy for Everyone.
Awesome.
I've been doing it for a really long time at the planetarium. I think we're going to do it in person this time too. We've been doing Zoom, but we've reduced the class size and hopefully it'll be safe. Everyone will be masked and we're going to give it a try, at least right now. Hopefully we'll get past this current wave and things will settle down a little bit by February.
Yeah. Well, we got we got two other comments coming in. So Michelle just said the class is full. So
okay. No. So sorry. Darn.
And then Judy asked about the planetarium.
Yeah, it was. I have done Zoom classes for a while since COVID, but this one, at least for now, is still in the planetarium. And then University for Seniors, that's also at UMD. In a different room, but that will be live as well. And again, that with reduced numbers of people, so we can preserve the safe distance.
Great. Well, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here tonight. Just I'll give you an applause from my home office to yours, and just say thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do this. We'll follow up. So we've got this recording. We'll go ahead and post this later on, and we can post some links if you want to share some of your books, link to your blog, all of this kind of stuff. We'll go ahead and share that with the folks that are here and interested. And on behalf of Cafe Sci, thanks again. And we will get together in about a month from now to speak with a professor in town who's been developing robots that are used for therapeutic research basically in town here. So that'll be our next talk. Bob, thanks again for coming back. 5 years. It's pretty awesome to have you be our 5th year anniversary speaker, starting it off and keeping us going. So
I'm still alive.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll call it a night. Thanks for coming out, everybody, and we'll see you around.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Bye now.
Yep. Take care. Bye, everybody.